Okay, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to the RUSA Town Hall on Title IX and Civic Engagement. We have some wonderful folks here with us tonight just to walk you through some logistical matters. We're going to be able to ask questions both in chat and over voice, if there are any. So if you want to ask your question in the chat, there's a Q&A box on the bottom right where you can enter and type your question, and we'll get back to you either at this meeting or following. And then in the Q&A portion, you can raise your hand. You'll be unmuted and able to speak freely, ask your question, and get a response from the panelists. So I just want to take a minute to introduce the panelists and they can introduce themselves. So if we want to start with, Jackie, and then we can go to Lauren, that'd be great.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jackie Moran. I am the Director of Student Affairs Compliance and Title IX on the New Brunswick campus. So our office is responsible for responding to all reports of sexual misconduct in which a student is accused of the misconduct. And we're also responsible for implementing Title IX on our campus. I've been in the role here at Rutgers for 7 years. So I was here when we drafted our first sexual misconduct policy, and now I have was very involved in the drafting of the new Title IX policy. So my goal tonight is to give everyone hopefully a quick overview of what's in the new policy, and then also, talk to you about how we got to where we are right now, and then also answer any questions that people have about the new policy. I know it is a very people have some really strong feelings about that, myself included. So I understand that, and I really want to give everyone the opportunity to share their thoughts and also their feedback on what is happening at this point.
Jackie, thank you so much. We're lucky to have you here tonight. And then Lauren?
Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Scott. I'm the director at the Office for Violence Prevention and Victim Assistance. I'm going to just be playing a support role tonight, but just a reminder of what VPVA is. We support survivors of interpersonal violence, and that is a very large umbrella term, means that we work with students who are survivors and victims of child abuse, domestic violence, family violence, sexual assault, stalking, and anything that falls under the interpersonal umbrella. And so I'm going to put our information in the chat room for everybody so that if something comes up tonight and it's triggering, you can reach out directly to our on-call advocates. They're available to you 24/7. And also, if you want to message me privately while this is going on, that should. Just thank you for the opportunity to be in the space with you, and hoping to come back maybe soon.
Thank you, Lauren. We're happy to have you here as well. So then let's do quick introductions from the RUSA side of things. We're acting as a support, being able to go through questions, but I'll begin. My name is Nick LaBelle. I am honored to serve as your student body president. So tonight's town hall is going to have a presentation portion by Jackie and then have Q&A following, again, where you can ask either in the chat box or over voice, and you'll be unmuted and allowed to go from there. And then we have Ari and Cooper as well with us tonight. So Ari, if you want to introduce yourself as a panelist.
Everyone, my name is Ariel Devlin, but as Nick said, my friends call me Ari. I serve this year as a student value vice president. And fun fact about me, I am one of 4 kids. So I hope everyone's having a great night as well.
Thank you, Ari. And then Cooper?
Hey everyone, I'm Cooper. I'm the secretary for RUSA.
Thanks, Coop. And so Lauren just put the information for BPVA in the chat if anyone needs to use that throughout the evening. But again, this is a very important issue that we all want to hear about. So without further ado, Jackie, if you want to present, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and I will do my best to figure out, oh, there we go. I'll try not to struggle too much here with the, no. All right, does that look right to you all?
Looks great.
Okay, so you can see the presentation. I feel like that's going to be the most challenging part. Okay, so obviously, as Nick said, we're going to be talking a little bit tonight about the new Title IX policy and grievance procedures. I am going to try to keep the presentation just to half an hour so that we have sufficient time for you all to ask questions and, for clarification or anything like that. This is really dense. There's a lot of information here, but I will, there are places for more clarification. If you want to read the new policy, that will probably answer a lot more questions. And I am available at any point, via email. If anyone has questions after the presentation, I'm happy to, set up one-on-one calls to talk about things, or to, just answer questions via email as well. Okay, so to start off, the new, actually, I'll kind of back up a little bit before we get to the new Title IX regulations. Title IX is a federal law that was passed in the 1970s that requires schools to, that prohibits schools from discriminating against anybody on the basis of sex. So it's a very, very broad law that has a number of different areas of it. The federal law itself is clarified by regulations. So those regulations are really what tell us kind of how to implement the law. A lot of the guidance that had come out of Title IX previously was not done through regulations. It was done through guidance documents, sub-regulatory guidance, letters from the Department of Education, but there was nothing that actually carried the force of law that dictated how we as schools were supposed to be responding to sexual misconduct, or at least not in the amount of detail that these new regulations do. So under the current administration, all of that sub-regulatory guidance and those letters and all of those things were rescinded, and new regulations were issued. So we got the heads up that these were coming back in I believe it was in 2017. We kind of knew that this was going to be coming down the pike, and we saw some draft regulations early last year. And we tried doing our best to kind of prepare for what that would mean for implementation, but we didn't actually receive the regulations until May 6th of 2020. So that was the date that the Department of Ed published the new regulations. And from then on, it was kind of a race to August 14th, which was the date that all schools are required to begin following these new regulations. I was telling Nick earlier that under normal circumstances, if we were all on campus, this would have been an incredibly challenging feat to achieve. But in the middle of a pandemic, when everyone is working from home, and many of the university administrators were being furloughed at the same time, it was really it was quite the challenge and scramble to kind of go through these 2,033 pages of regulations, analyze them, understand what they meant, figure out how to implement them on our campuses. And then we had to draft a new policy, revise our existing policies, and get and present all this information to senior leadership for their approval. So that was a 3-month time frame that we had to do all that. And I just share that with you for context, because one of the things that was important to us is that we get student feedback on the new policy. But there was absolutely no time for that during the drafting process. And I'll say the drafting process itself was more of a legal analysis exercise, because those 2,000 plus pages of regulations contradicted themselves in certain places, didn't quite make sense. And, there were a lot of folks involved just trying to interpret them and understand them. And then figure out how to implement them. So I think now is really a good time for everyone else to be reviewing the policy. It's still an interim status, and being able to provide us with some feedback. So at Rutgers, the process of actually developing the policy was overseen by the University Ethics and Compliance Office. So that's an office that has authority university-wide. This isn't just a New Brunswick policy. It applies equally to New Brunswick, Newark, Camden, and the RBHS schools. So what happened at the beginning of the process is Ethics and Compliance kind of identified 2 working groups. One was going to be focused on the existing employee sexual misconduct policies, and the other group was to be focused on the student sexual misconduct policies. When those 2 groups started doing their work and reviewing the policies and the new regulations, we very quickly realized that it made the most sense for the university to have one uniform Title IX policy. And the reason for this is that the new regulations actually are very clear in that stating that the application of the policy does not depend on whether the individual who's being accused is a student, staff, or faculty member. Everybody should be treated the same throughout this process. So it really made sense to have one uniform policy and one uniform set of procedures that applied to everybody at the university. So the working group kind of came together. We drafted the new policy. And this is something that I'm going to spend a little more time talking about. The Title IX policy applies only, it has a very narrow jurisdiction. And I'll talk about its jurisdiction in a minute, but it required us to figure out, well, how are we going to handle all of these cases that fall outside of, that fall outside of the sexual misconduct policy. Outside of the Title IX policy. Things that happen off campus, things that are not in connection with the university program or activity. What are we going to do about those? So for that, I'm going to call them our ancillary policies. So that's both our code of student conduct and on the employee side, the policies prohibiting discrimination and harassment, and then also our workplace violence policy. So those policies had to be revised to make sure that we were covering everything outside of the scope of Title IX. And then after the policies were drafted, the working groups reviewed everything. They were sent to a much larger review committee it did include some students on that committee. It included representatives from all the offices of violence prevention and victim assistance, from RUPD, from athletics, from student affairs, from all of the vice chancellor's offices, the vice chancellors for student affairs, general counsel's office. There were a number of people who saw the policies before they went up to senior leadership. Unfortunately, that review process was very brief. There was only, I believe it was like a 2 or 3 day turnaround time. But again, that was necessary in order to meet that August 14th deadline. So once that larger review committee saw the policies, they okayed it. There were minimal changes, and then they went up to senior leadership for approval. So the president's office had all the policies by August 1st and had some time to review it. And then it went to the secretary's office, and here we are. So as of August 14th, we have our interim Title IX policy and grievance procedures. And then we have the revised, the revised code of student conduct, and then revised policies prohibiting discrimination and harassment, and the revised policy on workplace violence. All of these, when they work together, replace the existing sexual misconduct policies that we had. So the policies that we had been using from 2015 up until last year, or up until August 13th, were replaced by these other policies. The existing one, or the previous ones, they're currently still in the policy library if anyone's interested in actually looking at them and comparing the differences, but they are no longer in effect. So I'm going to go through some of the key concepts that are in the Title IX policy. And this, again, there's a lot of really dense information here, but I'm going to try to go through it quickly and really highlight the pieces that I think are most impactful, or that are impacting students the most, or that could potentially impact the community the most. So the first is the idea of supportive measures. And this is something that we used to call them interim measures or accommodations. They're required by the new regulations. And what supportive measures are is all of those things that we can do to help students at the time that we receive a report that are not disciplinary, and that are individualized to that person and their situation. And the goal of supportive measures is for us to be able to help that person continue accessing their Rutgers programs or activities, but without taking any negative action against the accused person. And that's available even if no investigation, or if the complainant chooses not to participate in an investigation. Just a quick note on language. I tend to use the terms complainant and respondent because that's the language that we have in our policies. But typically the complainant is the victim or the survivor, and the respondent is going to be the person who's being accused of misconduct. But just to be consistent with the policy, I do tend to use the terms complainant and respondent. I just wanted to put that out there. Some examples of supportive measures that we previously used a lot and that we are going to continue to use, things like no contact orders, assisting students with housing relocation, changing academic or work schedules. If anybody needs an extension for coursework, that's something else that we can work with or that we can help with. And then also counseling. And I should have included in this list as well, referrals to the Office for Violence Prevention and Victim Assistance. That's always our #1 supportive measure for students. Anytime someone's been impacted by violence or trauma, we always try to connect them with an advocate at VPVA. Another concept that's outlined in the new Title IX policy is that of amnesty. This existed under our old sexual misconduct policy as well, and the revisions to it are very minor. So the first bullet point that I put here states what the entire amnesty provision is. I'm not going to read it to you, but in essence, it means that if somebody is involved in an incident that gets reported to the Title IX office, we are not going to refer that person to the Office of Student Conduct if they were using alcohol or any other drugs. Alcohol, even if they're underage, if they were using any kind of illegal substances, we're not going to refer them to the Office of Student Conduct for disciplinary action. Our old sexual misconduct policy stated that whenever possible, we would not take that action. It's been revised now to state that normally we won't take that action. In essence, as I said, I've been here for 7 years, and I can't think of any situation where we had ever referred a complainant to the Office of Student Conduct for any kind of alcohol or drug use. The two exceptions to the amnesty policy, or the two kind of caveats to it, are first, it doesn't apply in a situation where alcohol or drugs are used as a weapon or as a tool to facilitate some form of sexual misconduct. And second is it does not apply to potential misconduct by a student organization. So if there's a situation where an organization is serving alcohol to those who are under 21, we are going to likely report that to the Office of Student Conduct, but never for the actual individuals involved.
Jackie, you have a question in the chat. I can read it
I can't.
out loud. I'll read it to you.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you, Lauren. Okay.
Sure.
Sure.
It says, can respondents refuse to participate in an investigation, and what consequences will they face if they can and do?
That's a really good question. They can refuse to participate, and I'm actually going to get to that when we talk about the investigation process a little bit. So I'm going to hold off on answering it until we get to that point. And if I don't answer it sufficiently, somebody just kind of give me a heads up. Like I said, right now, for some reason, I can't see the chat. But Lauren, if you could, or Cooper or Nick, if you could kindly just give me a heads up, I'll stop talking. So another concept here that is noted in the new policy is, and this is something that I think can get a little confusing, is the difference between a report and a complaint. So a report, anybody can make a report to the Title IX office. It can be submitted via Maxiant, which is our online reporting form that we use. And I put a little, an image of it there. So this can very easily be accessed by going to the Title IX office's website. It's also available on the Office of Student Conduct website. It's available throughout the university at different sites. So this is the easiest way to submit information. The form gets sent directly to the Title IX office. It's secure, and it's only sent to only those of us who work in the Title IX office can actually view the form. But anyone can also report to us via email. Typically, when we're back on campus, you'll be able to reach us via phone or in person also. We're located on Richardson Street, and we've had plenty of students who just come in to talk to us and make a report in person. So what happens when we get a report is that the first thing we do is we notify the complainant that supportive measures are available and that they have the option to file what is now called a formal complaint. And this is something completely new in our process. It's required by the Title IX regulations. And I'll give you my honest opinion. I think it complicates things a little bit, having to distinguish between a report and a formal complaint. But again, the report is what initiates contact from the Title IX office. That's when we're going to reach out to a victim and say, hey, here are some options for counseling. Here's how you can make a report. Here's all the things that we can do to help you out, even if you don't want an investigation. Once the victim receives that information, one of the options, as I said, is to file a formal complaint. So this is what actually is going to initiate the grievance procedures that are outlined in the policy. So under the new regulations, it's required that the formal complaint has to be signed by the victim. That's something that I've actually always avoided because I don't want to make this process any more difficult for individuals than it needs to be. So we're trying to find some workarounds for that. So if somebody sends us an email and says that I want to file a formal complaint and this is who I am and this is my email address and that confirms that it's them initiating that complaint, that's okay. We have our case coordinator in our office has been working through some forms, some electronic forms that can just be submitted via email as well. So we're really trying to make this as smooth as possible for students. We cannot receive anonymous complaints anymore, or we can't pursue anonymous complaints anymore. That was something that we always tried to do, but we're not going to be able to anymore. However, we do have the option of the Title IX coordinator, which is, that's me, submitting the complaint on someone's behalf. So if I get a number of reports about misconduct, about somebody engaging in misconduct, I can be the one to actually initiate the complaint to start the investigation process. So even though we can't necessarily have an anonymous complaint, if there's enough information for the university to pursue an investigation on its own, that is something that we can do. Okay. So I mentioned before that the jurisdiction of the new Title IX policy is very narrow. And this is explicitly stated in the new regulations that these are the only area, or this is exactly the circumstances where Title IX applies. And anything that falls outside of these specific circumstances cannot be viewed as a Title IX complaint. So the jurisdiction is that the conduct has to have occurred within the United States, and it has to have occurred within a Rutgers education program or activity, and it has to constitute what the regulations refer to as covered sexual harassment. So I'll talk a little about the third one in a minute, but the first two essentially mean that if the conduct occurs at a study abroad program, it can't fall under our Title IX policy. If the conduct occurs at an off-campus house that is not recognized or affiliated with the university in any way, then it cannot be covered under the Title IX policy. Those two areas are the ones that caused me the most concern, and that, you know, this is where we are turning to the Code of Student Conduct to make sure that we can still give students a way to address those incidents, even though they're falling outside of the Title IX policy. So I'll go back to number 3 real quick. So the alleged conduct, if it has to constitute covered sexual harassment. And again, that's the terminology used in the Title IX regulations. Covered sexual harassment also has a very narrow definition. So it includes sexual harassment that is severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive. That is very different from our old sexual harassment definition, which was unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature. There is case law to support this new interpretation of it. It's kind of consistent with what is used in the employment context, but is a much narrower definition than we had been working under previously. sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking as defined by the Clery Act and the Violence Against Women Act amendments to the Clery Act are also considered covered sexual harassment. The definitions of those are very, very lengthy, and they are included as appendices in the new policy if anyone wants to take a look at those. But they are similar to the definitions that were in the previous sexual misconduct policy. The sexual harassment one is what is drastically different. So obviously, if you look at this list, sexual harassment, sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking, a lot is missing from that. A lot of the violations that were listed in our prior sexual misconduct policy are not included there. So what we did was we included those in the Code of Student Conduct. So the code now includes the old definition of sexual harassment. So unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature that limits somebody's ability to participate in their educational program. That real broad definition is now included in the code. Gender-based harassment also included in the code. Sexual exploitation, sexual intimidation, stealthing is something that was actually not in the old policy, but that we have now included under the Code of Student Conduct. So that typically refers to removing a contraceptive without the other party's permission. And then everything else that meets the definitions of covered sexual harassment, so assault, dating violence, domestic violence, or stalking, but that occurs outside of the United States or occurs outside of a Rutgers program or activity, those will also be addressed under the Code of Student Conduct. So I think we've done a pretty good job of closing up all those gaps that exist within the Title IX policy by moving the other definitions into the Code of Conduct. Lauren, I see you're back. Is there a question for me?
There is, and I think you're about to cover it, but I can't remember if it was in the slide deck or not. But the question is, will those also be included in policies concerning faculty and staff, excuse me?
Yes, I actually didn't include it in here because I was trying to limit myself to half an hour, which is challenging enough. So all of these definitions that are included in the Code of Student Conduct have also been included in the policy prohibiting discrimination and harassment. So anything that falls outside of the Title IX policy, but that refers to employee misconduct, is going to be covered under the policy prohibiting discrimination and harassment. So student side, we're sticking with the code. On the employee side, they're using that the policy that falls under the HR policies. But again, we made sure to cover all of this conduct in separate policies since we weren't allowed to be using the Title IX policy anymore. Another kind of complicated aspect of the new Title IX regulations. So the Title IX office is required to dismiss a complaint that doesn't meet those jurisdictional requirements that we just went through. So again, if a complaint is dismissed because it's outside of the jurisdiction of Title IX, we're going to address that under the Code of Student Conduct. And the process that we're going to use is this is where it gets complicated, I guess, or the procedures that we're going to use are actually the same as those within the Title IX policy. So we're not going to be using this code procedures. We're going to be using the Title IX procedures, but technically the violation would be considered the misconduct would be a violation of the code. Hi, Lauren.
This is so nice. Now you just know when I pop in.
I know, you pop up on my screen and I see those questions.
All right, this question, it says, I'm aware that the president to interpret gender-based discrimination as not including transgender individuals. Under these new Title IX regulations, would that be the same interpretation? In other words, does discrimination and harassment against transgender people fall under gender-based harassment? And then the person follows up to say, the present administration, meaning the Trump administration.
Okay, that is a really good and complicated question. And the Trump administration has removed a number of protections under Title IX regarding sexual orientation and also transgender individuals. So under Title IX, and it's a little bit in flux right now because I know there was a recent Supreme Court decision also regarding sexual orientation. But I asked this question of our general counsel's office when we were drafting the policy. Where are we putting gender-based harassment? And for now, we are keeping it in the code and not under Title IX for exactly that reason that you just described. It is not clear that the current administration is interpreting gender-based harassment as a Title IX violation. However, it is against the law in New Jersey, which gives me a little bit of peace. And we have full authority to keep it as a policy violation under the Code of Student Conduct. So that's why we're keeping it there, because the law is kind of in flux under Title IX. The reason that we chose to use the Title IX procedures, though, for those code violations is we didn't want to say that a violation under the code is less than a violation under the Title IX policy. It was really important to make sure that somebody who was going through either, whether it was a code violation or a Title IX policy violation, that it was being treated the same way. So that there's parity between those two policies. I don't know if that answered the question. I hope it did. But again, in short, it's unclear whether it's covered under Title IX, which is why we made sure that it is explicit in the Code of Conduct. This report complaint dismissal process is pretty convoluted. So we are working on some flowcharts to put on our website right now. Those are they've been drafted. I've reviewed them. Probably within another week or two, we're going to have those flowcharts up on the website so that it is a little easier to understand instead of kind of poring over the 40 pages that are in the Title IX policy. Okay, so there's a few other things that. Another question?
Yeah.
You frozen for a sec, Jackie. Yeah. So.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
I think you're good now, so you should be okay.
Am I good now? Okay.
The question, does that mean violation under the code will go through the court and cross-examination?
So a violation under the code will go through the disciplinary hearing process and would be subject to cross-examination. And that's the flaw in our plan. That was kind of the choice that we had to make. Do we make sure that we're treating everything equally in terms of process, or do we try to create a separate process that eliminates the cross-examination piece? We landed on that it was better to treat all of the potential violations the same way and use the same procedures because from a due process perspective, that seemed to be the most fair to everyone involved. That cross-examination piece, if there's a way to avoid it, I would have done it. But that was the price for keeping them, keeping the two procedures the same. I don't know. And one of the other things that we've kind of struggled with, usually when we're working on drafting a new policy or coming up with new processes, there's other schools that have done it before. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and we can look to our peers to say, hey, what are your best practices in addressing these situations? For these new regulations and these new policies, every school in the country was in exactly the same boat. So we're all trying to piece together what's going to work best. And I think it's going to take us some time to figure that out. So I think, a year from now, we're going to have a much better idea of how to handle some of these things. And right now, we're just going to, we're doing the best we can with what we have. But I think it's going to take some time to identify those areas of concern and then, revise the policy and address them.
So two separate questions from two different people. One is a follow-up to what explained. The question is, wouldn't that subject potential victims to trauma and significantly discourage any such reports?
It could, yes. And I hate that that's the answer I have to give, but yes, I think it could. And that has been one of the biggest challenges that everyone has been making to these new Title IX regulations, is that they are re-traumatizing to victims, and that the cross-examination process is going to have an extreme chilling effect on reporting.
The other question is, this is a nationwide effect. How are other universities reacting to the changes needed to be made, and how is our plan different or similar from others?
Yeah, so I think that was sort of what I touched on. From what I have seen, there's really two options. One is what we're doing, where we make sure that we're covering non-Title IX violations in a different policy, but still using the same procedures for all cases. Or there are other schools that are have their Title IX policy and procedures. And then they have, actually, there's three options that schools are doing. So they have their Title IX policies and procedures, and then they're using their code of conduct for everything else, including the code of conduct process. If you look at our procedures, the way the Title IX office has handled cases and the way the student conduct office has handled them has always been very different. There's never been an opportunity for investigation, for the type of investigation that Title IX does. That doesn't exist in the student conduct office. There's not investigation reports. There's not the opportunity to review evidence in quite the same way. And those are all things that we've learned are very important for victims to be able to access, which is why we want to make sure that we're keeping that piece for them. The third option that I've seen schools do is that they have one policy for their Title IX cases, one policy for their non-Title IX sexual misconduct cases, and then a third policy, which is essentially their code of conduct. And each of those three policies has a different procedure within it. We felt that was extremely complicated because it would essentially give us 6 different policies, because we'd have the student side and then we'd also have the employee side. So that, again, that just seemed incredibly complicated and burdensome for the community to figure out, well, which policy is this? How do I report under which one? What am I doing? So we've tried to kind of streamline it by keeping the 2 policies on the student side, but using the same procedure. I'm just going to keep on going. And, this is great that people are asking questions. I'll probably go a little beyond a half hour then. But some of the other, one of the things that has not changed is the support that we're offering to students and that we're hoping students get throughout these processes. And this applies equally to Title IX or Code of Student Conduct violations. So anyone going through our process is allowed to have a support person with them. They can the support person can accompany the person to meetings, to the disciplinary hearing. They can't represent them, but they can come and be present with them at any meeting with the Title IX office or the Office of Student Conduct. The idea of an advisor, actually, I'm going to skip that. I'm going to go to the next one, and then we'll go back to an advisor. The second type of support that we have for students is called a campus liaison. This is referred to as a campus advisor in our old policy and also in the Code of Student Conduct. So this is someone who typically works at the university, either in student affairs or in one of the academic schools, who's been trained specifically to provide support and guidance to people who are going through the Title IX process. And again, they can go with the student to any meeting or hearing, and again, be present as a resource for them. One of the benefits, I think, to working with a campus liaison is often that person can help students recognize when maybe they should be seeking counseling or maybe reaching out to faculty for academic adjustments. They're kind of another set of eyes to help keep an eye on someone, and another set of ears for that person to be able to be able to talk to as they're going through the process. So those are two roles that existed under the old policy and that we're keeping obviously within the new one. The third role, and this is, it's called an advisor. And this is, again, the language that's in the Title IX regulations. This is a very, very narrow role. And this person is the one who is going to conduct cross-examination at a hearing. If a party doesn't have an advisor at a hearing, the university is required to provide one for them. And their only purpose is to conduct cross-examination at the hearing. It can be an attorney, but it does not have to be. It can also be a witness in the investigation, which was something that we had always prohibited in the past. We didn't want people to serve in those dual roles, but it's something that we have to allow now under the new Title IX regulations. And again, the advisor can attend any kind of other meetings, but they can't speak or represent the person except for that very limited capacity of conducting cross-examination at the hearing. And I'm going to talk a little more about cross-examination in a few minutes. So here's just a real quick basic flow chart of what kind of what we've gone through already. So a report is something that any member of the community can submit regarding any kind of sexual misconduct. A formal complaint is the document that's going to actually start the grievance procedures. And when I'm talking about grievance procedures, there's really two options. One is the branch to the right, where there's an investigation and then a hearing. And then the other is the branch to the left, where there's an informal resolution process, and then that results in a written agreement between the parties. Lauren?
Falls into what you're talking about. Will reports of code of conduct violation be limited to the original timeline of 60 days or the new timeline of 90 days?
The new timeline of 90 days. Again, that's something that's outlined in the so that's going to be 90 days. So here, real quick, just going back to this little flow chart. So first I'm going to talk about the left-hand side, which is informal resolution. And then I'm going to talk about the right-hand side, which is the investigation and hearing process. So informal resolution is something that we always had available under the sexual misconduct policies. It's also required in the new regulations. But what an informal resolution is, and Lauren, please chime in if I misstate anything here. This is really Lauren's area of expertise. But informal resolution is voluntary. So any party that goes through this, it has to be on their own terms, and they volunteer to do this. And it focuses on remedies. It doesn't focus on fact finding. There's no investigation involved in this. And it's designed to allow a respondent or the accused person to acknowledge that their behavior caused harm and then accept responsibility for repairing that harm. So we're not asking them to acknowledge that they violated the code. We're not asking them to acknowledge that they violated our policy. What they're supposed to do in this process is acknowledge that they caused harm to another person or group of persons. And there's a number of options that are available under informal resolution. There's educational programs and workshops that VPVA runs. We also can do impact statement discussions where a complainant writes an impact statement. The Title IX office or VPVA shares that with the respondent, and then the respondent has an opportunity to, discuss that with us and, kind of understand how their behavior impacted the other person. We can also do mediation. And then there's a whole host of restorative practices that are available under informal resolution as well. There's a lot of information out there on restorative practices that we're going to be posting up on our website so that you all can read about it and kind of understand more of what it is. But again, the focus is really on that accountability, acknowledging harm, and accepting responsibility for repairing the harm. At the end of an informal resolution process, the parties come together and a written agreement is created. It's an agreement between the parties. The university is not a party, is not part of that agreement. The parties are bound to the agreement and they can't request a formal investigation of the incident once that agreement is actually signed. If they don't comply with the agreement, that in and of itself could be a violation of the Code of Student Conduct or perhaps a different policy. I wanted to make sure we talked about informal resolution tonight because to me, it's a very important tool that hopefully will help address those concerns about the chilling effects on reporting that these new regulations are causing or will likely be causing. I think there's no doubt that the cross-examination piece is okay, I'm not going to say there's no doubt. I'm trying to keep my own personal feelings out of this. The cross-examination piece will very likely be traumatic and be a deterrent for people to make reports. But what I think it's really important to understand is that there is another option, and that option is the informal resolution process. And we've actually seen a huge uptick in students taking advantage of the informal resolution process within the past year, because it's a way to really, it focuses on repairing harm. It doesn't focus on discipline like the investigation does. It focuses on the repairing harm. So we've met with a lot of students where that's what they want. They want an apology. They want the person to acknowledge that they hurt them. And that's what the informal resolution is designed to do. So to the extent that there are very valid concerns about what the cross-examination or people wanting to avoid cross-examination, I just want to make sure that it's clear that there is making a report and filing a complaint with the Title IX office is not going to automatically go towards investigation and hearing. There is this whole other path that is a much more restorative approach. So that was the informal process and the restorative approach. Now we're going to go look at the other side of that flow chart with investigation and hearing. And I've just noted here some of the areas that are required by the new regulations, because they're things that I think if you're just reading through the policy, you would say, well, why did anyone put this in the policy? We only put it there because we were required to. So first, the investigation. Investigators within the Title IX office interview parties, witnesses, and gather evidence. That's something that we've always done. That's going to continue to look essentially the same. Once the interviews are complete, the parties are going to have electronic access to all of the evidence that was submitted. So we're probably going to be using something like Box. All the evidence is going to go into that. The parties will have access to it, and they'll be able to view all the evidence that was submitted. They're going to have 10 days to review that evidence and respond to it, so they can send more information to the investigators based on what they see in that evidence. The investigators are then going to take all that information, the evidence and the responses from the parties, and draft an investigation report. The parties are then going to have the opportunity to review that draft investigation report and respond to it. And again, the investigators are going to take all that information and synthesize it into a final investigation report. And that final investigation report gets sent out to both parties and then also to the decision maker who's going to be presiding over the disciplinary hearing. So this is a big change in our process. Previously, we were able to do an investigation, and then if a person wanted to accept responsibility for violating the policy, they could do that, and the case would not proceed to a hearing. Under the new regulations, we are required to hold a hearing for every investigation. So there will be no sanctions issued until a live hearing is held, unless the parties go through that informal resolution process. Neither party can waive the right to a live hearing. So this goes way back to somebody's question at the very beginning. A respondent can choose not to participate in the investigation, and they can choose not to participate in the hearing. They can't actually waive their right to it, but they can choose not to attend. And then the decision maker is going to make their decision based only on the information that they have. So that information will likely all be from the complaint party. But the respondent is not required to talk to the investigators or to attend the hearing. The university is going to go, as I just said, the university will proceed with the hearing regardless of whether or not the party chooses to attend. And we're going to have in place very clear guidelines for the decorum to be followed at the hearing. This isn't something that we had previously. One of the main reasons for these decorum guidelines is to make sure that the cross-examination is being kind of kept controlled by the decision maker. So the term decision maker, this is the person who is going to be making the determinations regarding responsibility, whether or not the responding party is responsible for violating the Title IX policy or the Code of Student Conduct. And they're also going to be making the decision on what sanctions will be imposed. We used to use the term hearing officer. I might use them interchangeably at this point just because I'm used to saying hearing officer. But the language in the regulations is decision maker. They receive specialized training to serve in this particular role. And they are also going to be making decisions about whether witnesses are relevant and whether evidence is relevant and whether questions are relevant. And I'll talk about that in a sec with the cross-examination piece. After the hearing, the decision maker will notify the parties of their decision in writing within 5 working days of the hearing. This is all very similar to how hearings were run. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, so I know that you're running out of time in general, so I'm just going to pose the question. You can take
Okay.
it or try to finish slides, but I just want the
Okay.
students' voices to be heard.
Absolutely.
Do you anticipate that requiring live hearings will create a backlog?
No. I don't, because we've always had live hearings in our process. So Rutgers is one of the schools. This is one area where a lot of schools are scrambling now to figure out how to hold live hearings, but this is something we've always done. Yes, we might have a few more than we did in the past, but it's something that has always been part of our process. So when I say live hearing, that can be either in person or it can be virtual. You know, there are ways to do this via Zoom. Zoom is probably a little better than WebEx, but there's ways to do this using technology. And we've always used that previously. And now, obviously, it's going to be a little more necessary until we're all back on campus. The parties don't have to be in the same room or location when we're holding a hearing. Again, it can be done virtually. At the hearing, the parties are going to present their information. The investigators are going to present the investigation report. Witnesses can present information. And again, the decision maker is going to be the one to determine whether the witnesses are relevant or whether the evidence that's being submitted is relevant. The decision maker also has the opportunity to ask the parties and witnesses questions. And then we get to the cross-examination piece by the advisors. So this is all new. This is not something that was ever permitted in the past. The way we ran our hearings previously is that the parties were able to submit questions in writing, and they would give them to the hearing officer, and the hearing officer would determine whether those questions were relevant and whether they were appropriate. If they were not appropriate, the hearing officer would kind of reword them so that they could get the same information, but it really minimized the adversarial nature of what a hearing could look like. Now, under the new regulations, the advisors have to be permitted to conduct cross-examination orally and directly to the party. So we're no longer allowed to submit it in writing. We're no longer allowed to have those questions submitted through the hearing officer. They have to be asked directly by the advisors. What is going to change the pace a little bit, though, is that every time an advisor asks the question, the decision maker has to stop and say, yes, I'm going to allow that question, or no, I'm not going to allow it because it's not relevant. And then they have to explain why. So it's not going to be that same like quick fire type cross-examination that can happen in a courtroom. It's really going to be a much slower cadence than that. Which hopefully will help minimize some of the impact or some of the trauma that we're all concerned about seeing during that process. The advisor can ask questions of the other party, even if, let's say the complaint party chooses not to attend the hearing, their advisor can still come and their advisor can still ask questions of the responding party. So again, this doesn't impact the student's right to choose not to attend the hearing. Their advisor can still attend even if they choose not to. I only have a couple of more slides, and I'll just kind of go through this quickly. So that was a lot on what has changed and what is new in the Title IX policy. Some of the things that have not changed at all, our definition of consent is exactly the same as it was in the old, the prior sexual misconduct policy. The definitions of incapacitation and coercion and force and how those interact with the definition of consent is all the same as it was in the prior policy. We still maintain privacy within the Title IX office. Information is only shared on a need-to-know basis. There are still a number of confidential resources on campus, including VPVA, CAPS, health services, student legal services, all of that still exists. We've always had a practice in place where if somebody makes a disclosure during a public awareness event, like following a Scream Theater performance, we don't consider that a report. We want students to be able to engage in these conversations. We want you to have spaces to be able to talk about things that have happened. So we're not going to consider those reports. Even if somebody from the Title IX office is present during one of those events, we're still not going to consider that a report. We want you to come to us with a report. We're not going to go hunting that down. The other piece that hasn't changed is mandatory reporting. And this is an area where schools kind of, take different approaches to it. But we are still taking the approach that any employee of the university who knows about an incident of sexual misconduct is required to report that to the Title IX office. Some of the things that have not changed within the process are the sanctions that can be imposed. So that's always been, anything ranging from probation all the way up to expulsion. So all of the same sanctions are still available throughout both the Title IX process. And if we're looking at code violations, parties still have the same rights to appeal that they always did previously. And then FERPA and other privacy laws protecting student records still apply. So there are still the same restrictions on disclosing the outcome of Title IX cases that have always been in place. And the other thing that obviously is the same as other laws related to sexual assault, so the state laws and then the Clery Act, all of those have not changed, even though Title IX obviously has pretty substantially. And then lastly, and this is just a little more about the Title IX office specifically, things that we've always done and that we're going to continue to do. We are all very focused on making sure that we're staying up to date with the best training that's available on conducting investigations and addressing sexual misconduct cases. And this includes a large focus on making sure that all of our training is trauma informed. It's something that it's always been crucial to our office, and it's been very beneficial, I think, and very helpful to our students. So that's something we're going to continue to work on. All of the sexual misconduct cases where a student is a respondent, so this is both those cases under Title IX and those sexual misconduct cases under the Code of Student Conduct, are going to be processed by the Title IX office. We're not going to distinguish between sending some to Title IX and some to student conduct. They'll all be handled within the Title IX office. Likewise, all of those types of cases against employees are going to stay with the Office of Employment Equity. That's the office that's always handled those historically. And then the last piece that has not changed, will not change, is that everyone within the Title IX office, within BPVA, Dean of Students office, anywhere within student affairs is available to answer questions, to speak with students. And I've always been very comfortable discussing situations hypothetically. If someone calls me and says, hey, what if this happened to a friend of mine? What can I do? I will gladly have those conversations. And again, we're not going to consider that a report unless somebody actually wants to make it one. But all of us are going to continue to be available to help kind of guide students through this process. I understand it's a lot more complicated than it was before. My goal is to make sure that from your point of view, it looks as similar to what it did, as similar as possible to what it did before. And then we're going to deal with the confusing stuff on our end. But I want it to be just as accessible as it's always been in the past. And anything that we can do to help students understand what this process looks like, we're going to continue to do. And I've gone way over my time, and I'm really sorry about that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, if I can figure out how to do that. Stop sharing. There we go. Okay. And now I see there's a whole bunch of questions.
I think most of them got answered as folks were going through the presentation, Jackie.
Good.
But you were going over time. It was, we'd keep you for like hours if we could. You know what I mean? So thank you for coming and speaking about this very important issue. But we do have Dr. Maddow, if you're on the call, we'll take like 5 to 10 minutes if we can, just to get some questions that folks maybe couldn't ask. So if anyone has a question and wants to raise their hand, please do so, and I'll call on them and we can unmute them. So Andrew, I see your hand go up, and I'll unmute you if you want to ask a question.
Me?
That's you.
Okay. Well, I had one other question. What is the standard of evidence that's being used by the ultimate decision maker in these cases?
Thank you for asking that question. That's actually really important. So we're going to be sticking with the preponderance of evidence standard. Schools had the option of raising the standard of evidence to clear and convincing, and that is not something that we wanted to do. So we're staying with preponderance of the evidence.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Andrew.
Sure.
Any other questions for Jackie? You can put them in the chat, or you could raise your hand. I know that our sexual violence committee had prepared some questions. We could always ask those, another time if there's no questions currently. So any questions for the panelists? I think you answered a lot of them during the presentation.
Okay, that was my goal.
Thank you, Jackie.
Sure.
Okay, we'll give it like 1 more minute, and if not, then we can, part ways. Thank you again for coming, and we'll move on to the next part of the meeting.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting us too.
Okay, we have Jay. So Jay, if you want to ask a question, I'll call on you real quick. So let me 1 moment, please. Okay, Jay, you should be unmuted.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you. So, so one of the questions that we were talking about in our committee was basically about outreach. So we were wondering what exactly the plan is to outreach and I guess educate students on what the current Title IX changes are for the future, and also one of the other parts of like outreach would be to encourage students to report incidents of sexual assaults, considering that the new policy, as you said before, kind of makes it significantly more daunting to do that.
Lauren, can I look to you for some of this? Because this is really, VPVA and Title IX work so closely together, and we really, VPVA does so much of the outreach. So I'm gonna let you answer some of it, and then I'll chime in.
Okay. Jay, I know that you and I are trying to set up a time to get students trained. So that will be one way. I'm formally training those affiliated with RUSA. And I think we can start integrating this into Scream productions and thinking about how to do bystander intervention. So that will be one part of it. And I think we will probably, as far as getting students grouped together, I think we can utilize Greek Life and other organizations, student orgs, to maybe do a tandem teaching. So Bill Spear, he can help. He's the training coordinator for Title IX. He can do part of it. We can do part of it. I think what we want to do is be creative in how we want to talk about bystander intervention and what that looks like. And so we'll get together. Both of our offices will get together and figure out how to do that and roll it out. But we're actually open to suggestions from you in terms of we need to know how you're getting together. And so the advantages that we have when VPVA goes out is usually working with athletics or with you or with Greek Life, but it's all those students that are not affiliated with organizations that is how, or those are the groups that we need to reach. So we are so open to input. We are well versed that people are experiencing Zoom fatigue. So the input from you is like, well, how are people open to taking in this information and being a part of this and then applying it into their lives when we actually get to interact in person again. And so one thing, we have designed something that we rolled out through NSO where how to do bystander intervention in the context of COVID. And we think about all of the stuff that factors into that. So victim blaming of like, why are you even at parties when a global pandemic is happening? And so all these things we're trying to navigate and have discussions on. But again, we're going to roll something out. Jay, if we can discuss that, I think we're going to get together sometime soon. We can talk about more in detail. And also if there's a way that we can hear from all of you, how to best reach students, that would be helpful for us.
I agree with that.
Yeah, that sounds good. So, Nick, I have one more question. Do we have time?
I think if Dr. Matto will allow us, we'll take your question and then one from Max, and then we can call tonight.
Okay.
It's fine with me, Nick.
Thank you, Dr. Matto.
Okay, so the other question that I had was based on the concern on the Title IX policy, specifically consent. I know, again, you touched upon this before, but when I was going through the Title IX policy changes, one of the things that I saw was under consent, the definition, it doesn't explicitly state that consent cannot be given under the influence. So I was wondering, as you said before, that some of those changes were put under code of conduct. So how is that going to be covered, and how are students going to be protected in that case? If I read that correctly.
Sure. So the definition of consent is exactly the same as it was under the prior sexual misconduct policy. So there's never been a statement that if someone is under the influence of alcohol or drugs that they can't consent. What the standard is if somebody is incapacitated because of alcohol or drug consumption. So I actually, if you look at the policy, I think it's a few paragraphs down from consent. There's a paragraph on coercion and force. And then there's another paragraph on incapacitation. And the language that's used there mirrors what's in the state law. So state law uses a threshold of incapacitation. So that's kind of where we're limited to. The law does not support us saying that if somebody consumes any alcohol or drugs, they can't consent. The threshold under the law is at incapacitation. And then again, like I said, that is stated clearly in the Title IX policy. It's just a few paragraphs down.
Okay, great. Thank you. That was basically all the questions I had. So yeah, Thank you for taking the time for this town hall.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me.
And then we'll have a question from Max, and then we can move on. So Max, I'll mute you for a moment, and then you can go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yep.
Great. A question to Jackie. So you mentioned it briefly during the presentation that basically when the report is made to potential violation of students' code of conduct, the report will go through the same process as the new Title IX, including the 90 days new time period and the live cross-examination. So my question is that when you have the opportunity to make it less daunting and to eliminate certain process, such as the live cross-examination and the longer timeline in a semester, why didn't you do it?
That's a really good question. And I think that is probably one of the key decisions that we had to make, that, again, balancing. Actually, I'll back up. I'll give you the kind of my thought process. And this was, this isn't my decision individually. This was the decision that the working groups came to, and that was approved by the overall committee. But my thought process in looking at it is that at Rutgers, from what we've seen, the majority of our reports of sexual assault come from locations off campus. So they are technically not under the Title IX policy because they're not in connection with a university education program or activity. And those are cases of sexual assault. They are identical to a case of sexual assault that would be reported on campus within one of our residence halls. So we did not want to treat those two situations differently just because of where they occurred. And we recognize, and I fully recognize that means that we're potentially having a more onerous process for those off-campus things, but we want to make sure that all students are that the students have the same rights regardless of where the incident occurred. That might be different at other schools if their geography is different than ours. So if they have, 90% of their students living on campus, so 90% of their assault cases are going to fall under Title IX, they might make a different decision. But given the looking at our statistics and how many incidents occurred off campus, that was, that's kind of the decision that we came to now. I will tell you, we're going to be paying a lot of attention to that this year, and looking at our reports and seeing where reports are falling off. Are students saying, you know what, I absolutely don't want to go through that process. The investigation and hearing and possible cross-examination, I don't want to go through that, so I'm not going to file a formal complaint. We're going to be looking at all of that this year, so that if changes have to be made, they will be.
Much.
Yeah, that's just the one thing I kind of want to emphasize is that, yes, we are facing Senate, the Senate review and Board of Governors approval of the policy. So it likely will be finalized, by the end of 2020. But in my mind, that it's not set in stone. We will always have the opportunity to review and revise the policy if it is not working or if we identify areas of concern. So I really encourage everyone to continue thinking about these things, asking these questions, and I am going to push to make sure that revisions are made next year, because I know within my office we're going to find flaws and concerns with the policy. So to the extent that the student body is identifying those, we want to hear them, because I really want them. I just because it's going to be finalized by the Board of Governors doesn't mean that it is the ultimate, Title IX policy. There's always room for revision within the policies.
Thank you so much. And we have one final question real quick.
One final question.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Dr. Mato. He sent a very aggressive message, like, please ask the question, so I'll make sure to ask it. So one moment, please. Our good friend Miguel. Miguel, go for it.
Can you hear me? Okay, so these rules and regulations for Title IX, it's under the current administration. Is the Rutgers administration prepared to respond to a potential Biden administration rescinding and changing those rules, so that fast action can be taken to change the process?
Hopefully, I'm not speaking out of turn to say that we are prepared. And I mean, for me personally, I'm hopeful that that's what happens in terms of rescinding these regulations or modifying them at least. The one piece to keep in mind is that it's not going to be a fast process, because we're now talking about regulations that have the force of law. So the only way to change them is to go through the notice and rulemaking period again. So we will have the time to review whatever the draft rules look like. We'll have the notice and comment period like we did last time, and then we'll be able to get the new, then we would get new rules. I think we're at least, if the administration changes, I'd say we're looking at it would take at least a year from the time that a new president takes office to appoint a new Secretary of Education and then have regulations like this be revised. So I think we've got time, but I also think that going through it this time under a very expedited time frame was a really, I think that if and when it happens again, we're ready. We know how to do it this time. And hopefully, knock on wood, we'd be back on campus, back in person. And it would make the process a lot easier. And the other piece is that my hope is that a new administration would give us more than 90 days to pull something like this together, because that was much too brief of a time to do it. So I think that a new administration would be a little more understanding of that.
Thank you for your answer.
You're welcome.
Well, that is the perfect segue into the next speaker tonight.
Yes,
so,
absolutely. Please vote.
Please, that's what we're going to talk about next. So, Jackie, again, thank you so much for coming. It was a real pleasure having you. This is a vital issue of our campus and something we all care deeply about. So thank you again for taking the time to talk with us. And I know that we'll talk shortly about other things we can do with you and Lauren about how to make things better at Rutgers as best we can. So Lauren, thank you for coming. Jack, thank you for coming. RUSA,
Absolutely,
thank
thank you.
We all thank you. And then we have to go to Dr. Maddow to do the next part of the evening. So thank you again so much.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so Dr. Maddow, I'm going to try to make you presenter now.
Okay, great.
And then should be good. Okay, thank you, Dr. Maddow.
Okay, absolutely. I'm just going to share my screen real quickly. I think I am. 1 second. I've been so used to Zoom, I haven't done WebEx in a while.
Yeah, it should be on the bottom of the screen.
Yep,
yeah,
I think I see it. Okay.
Perfect.
You see it? Okay, great. There we go. Okay, so hello, everybody. I saw some familiar names and faces in the participant list. So hi, everybody. So my name is I haven't met you before. You don't know who I am. My name's Elizabeth Maddow. I'm an associate research professor at the Eagleton Institute of Politics on the Cook-Douglas campus for when we're on the Cook-Douglas campus. And I direct our Center for Youth Political Participation there. And one of my roles as director of the Center for Youth Political Participation is to be the director of the initiative, Are You Voting? So what I'm here tonight, and I really appreciate Nick and I appreciate RUSA inviting me to speak tonight and share some resources with you. And I've shared this PowerPoint with the RUSA folks, and I'm happy if anyone wants to shoot me an email. I'm happy to share this with whomever I can share it with. I did a presentation last week for the Rutgers University Senate. But what I really want to be doing as much as I can now, certainly before October 13th, but all the way till November 3rd, is really issuing a call to action from everyone to everyone on campus, from faculty, administration, students, to do everything we can to protect the student vote this fall. So what I want to do in this presentation today is just talk to you a little bit about the initiative that I run, Are You Voting?, which is a campus-wide resource providing students nonpartisan voter registration and get out the vote information. Talk a little bit about the nature of, from sort of a broad top level, about what we know about youth political participation right now, challenges facing young adults when it comes to access to the polls this fall, but also some encouraging signs. But really do want to raise some awareness about the potential threat to the youth vote nationally, but also on the Rutgers campus, given this global pandemic and the ramifications for students in particular. But then really, most importantly, giving you some tools, giving all of us some tools on what we can be doing as a campus to support the student vote. So just to give you a little bit of background, so Are You Voting is an initiative that was created by the president's office years ago. Actually, it was President McCormick when he was president, created by the university. And it's really meant to be a campus resource, nonpartisan, accurate, comprehensive resource that is very much Rutgers specific. It's meant to speak to Rutgers students specifically. And as you all know, the Rutgers campus is a complicated campus, geographically dispersed. We're in, more than one municipality. And even in the best of circumstances, it's a challenging feat to get yourself registered into the polls. But recognizing the challenges, especially for Rutgers students, it's really meant to be a Rutgers specific resource administered by the Eagleton Institute of Politics and the Center for Youth Political Participation. Probably a core feature is our website, and it's really been honed over the years to be a one-stop shop for Rutgers students, really providing, again, all of the information that Rutgers students need to get themselves registered, to fill out their voter registration forms correctly, and to find their polling location. We certainly don't work alone, and I believe some partners from NJ-PIRG are going to be speaking after I am. We, Rutgers, Are You Voting, in partnership with the Division of Student Affairs and with NJ-PIRG in recent elections, have been really working intentionally, collaboratively. It takes a lot of people to get this work done. And so we've really been working collaboratively to create campus-wide voter registration and mobilization initiatives and trying to work in tandem as much as possible. And we really do have a proven track record, thankfully. When you look, we, Rutgers University, from its inception, have been part of a national study called the National Study for Learning, Voting, and Engagement, based at Tufts University, which provides campuses such as Rutgers, but hundreds of campuses across the country, voter registration data and turnout data that really allow us to measure how we're doing when it comes to getting students registered and to the polls. And we have found with this data that Rutgers turnout rates really outpace comparable institutions, which is encouraging. And we certainly have seen on this campus increased voter turnout rates. Much of that I would attribute to the purposeful collaboration between RU Voting, Division of Student Affairs, and NJPIRG. But we, Rutgers, New Brunswick, actually earned a number of accolades in 2018 for our voter turnout rates. Our rates increased dramatically between 2014 and 2018, and we won the greatest growth in student voter turnout in the Big Ten Voting Challenge. And then we also were awarded a gold seal from the All In Democracy Challenge. So we really have honed a model on this campus over the years, but I would say especially in the last few elections, that has been demonstrably effective. So certainly that's all the good news. And we know, just to kind of take a step back, first of all, we shouldn't have to say this, but it's worth really saying why youth political participation in all elections is important. Really underscoring that a large number of young adults are out there. When you're looking at the eligible voting population, a significant portion of that eligible voting population are young. Millennials and Gen Z constitute 37% of the eligible voting population. And across the country, there are approximately 20 million young college students eligible to vote. As probably all of you on this call know, certainly if you were a student of mine, we talk about it all the time, but certainly we know that millennials, Gen Z are really a unique cohorts, generations, if you're looking in comparison to other generations. Not only are the millennials the largest generation in American history, so just certainly by size alone, a force to be reckoned with. Certainly one of the most diverse generations in American history, best educated generations in American history. However, facing significant challenges. For example, the Great Recession hit millennials harder than any other generation, and it's a reality that millennials are still trying to recover from. Student loan debt is something uniquely burdensome to this generation compared to previous generations. And then clearly, what college students are going through right now in the midst of the COVID crisis. Now, while we know that for the most part in recent elections in the last 15 to 20 years, voter turnout rates among young adults have lagged behind older generations, there have been really obvious signs of increased interest and propensity to participate in elections. As I said, 2018, we saw significant upticks not only on our campus, but nationwide, with voter turnout rates really doubling. It's also really worth emphasizing that, often I would say young adults are unfairly maligned as being disengaged or not interested in politics or apathetic. I would counter that with a few bits of research. First, indicating or suggesting that, in the United States, the voter registration and turnout process is very different from comparable democracies, and in many ways explains why our turnout rates are lower compared to other democracies. So for example, the fact that every state devises their own registration and election day practices. The fact that in most states, the burden is on the individual student to get themselves registered. Or individual voter to get themselves registered, as opposed to being automatically registered to vote. The fact that, in some states, voter registration deadlines are Monday, that they come fairly early, they come quickly and well before Election Day. So first of all, there are burdens associated with voter registration and turnout, and many of those burdens weigh heavily on young adults. For one reason is because they have a very limited to no voting history. And the other being that young adults move frequently. As I often tell my students, I've lived in the same house for over 20 years. I haven't had to update my voter registration in at least 20 years. whereas probably a number of you on this call are moving frequently, sometimes from residence hall to residence hall between years. That requires you to update your voter registration every time you move. So that's a burden for young adults. I'd also argue that, young adults compared to previous generations haven't had nearly the sort of civic education that previous generations have had. But then finally, really want to emphasize, it is inaccurate to assume or to accuse young adults of being apathetic or uninterested in politics. I would say millennials and Gen Z in particular have a very strong interest in addressing public problems in their communities, and especially in recent years have turned to politics, have turned to democratic processes and democratic institutions such as voting, but not solely voting, but such as voting, as a way to address these problems. So now, really want to talk about why 2020 is a concern, and the global pandemic and the effects of it really can theoretically pose a threat to the youth vote, certainly not just on the Rutgers campus, but nationwide. As you all know, certainly in New Jersey, but nationwide, in the interest of public health and responding to this public health emergency, a number of states around the country, including New Jersey, have changed their election day practices. So whenever there is a change to voter registration or election day practices, that suggests some confusion. So that often offers, uncertainty to college students, voters all around the country, but certainly college students who have a limited voting history. The other significant challenge is that so many students have been displaced. And are not where they thought they would be this fall. And so there's that additional uncertainty of where to register, where to get your ballot, where to cast your ballot. And so the fear is, or the concern is, and that's why I'm here, appealing to all of you to assist and really address these concerns, is that we don't want these voting gains that took place in 2018 to be reversed. Some of the challenges are the fact that we're not in person on campus. If were it not for this situation, are you voting? NJ Perg, we all would have been out there as in force, in mass on voter registration day, or on National Voter Registration Day, on Constitution Day. We would be out doing parties at the polls on Election Day, really helping students, walking students through the process of getting registered and getting to the polls. Again, there's the challenges of the uncertainty of, what is an active registered voter? Will I get my ballot? Where will I get my ballot? How do I fill out my ballot? So there's the uncertainty. And again, coupled with a limited voting history, young adults in particular, college students around the country, we have data from the NSOLV study, tend to vote in person, don't have much familiarity or experience with vote by mail. So not only a familiarity, but a comfort level with vote by mail and a sense of confidence in it. They don't necessarily have that experience. And the other challenge is young adults do tend to vote in large numbers provisionally. So that means showing up on election day and asking for a paper ballot when you believe you should be getting, that you should have access, that you should be registered, and you should be on the voter registration rolls, and you're not. In previous years, you've been able to vote provisionally. You will be able to vote provisionally this year also. But often those are unsuccessful, and we can talk about why. But that's also a concern, and that could also be a threat to youth voting this fall. So I want to talk a bit about what you can do and what we are recommending to students. And you may have seen President Holloway's email message today that we helped work with him on this. And it's really echoed in these ideas that I want to share with you today, sort of a call to action to have a plan to vote. So, and it's worth, again, emphasizing, this is regarding New Jersey specifically. New Jersey's election practices are going to be different this year due to Executive Order 177. And based on this executive order, we have a set of recommendations that we're recommending to students. And as I mentioned, I'm happy to share this PowerPoint with you, and certainly Nick can share it with all of you. These are, I have hyperlinks embedded in here so that will take you exactly where you need to go. But first of all, it's really important that you check your voter registration status. Under Executive Order 177, every active registered voter will be getting a ballot in the mail. So it's incumbent upon all of us to check our voter registration status, to really make sure we're registered, and to make sure we know where our ballot is going. And this is particularly important for college students. For those of you who perhaps registered to vote last year and were in residence halls, were living in residence halls, say, for example, you were living on the Douglas campus and you were living in the Jamesons, and so you registered to vote in the Jamesons. So you need to know if that's where you registered to vote, because that's where your ballot's going to go. And you may not be there to get your ballot. So first of all, it's really important to know that you're registered and decide, do you need to change where your ballot is going to be going? Do you need to update your voter registration to the address where you're currently residing? So if you need to update your voter registration, what's really, really important for everyone to know is that you need to do it soon. You need to do it by October 13th. That's coming up quickly. I've offered you there's a link here that takes you, we Rutgers have Turbo Vote, and you can access Turbo Vote on the Are You Voting Rutgers page of our website. So really, really important to know that if you are not registered, if you haven't registered to vote and you want to, in New Jersey, you must do it by October 13th. Or if you want to update your address, if you're in a different location, you want to be registered in a different location, you need to do that by October 13th, so quickly. You will, once you get your ballot in the mail, you will receive your ballot. Really, really encouraging people to fill them out right away and submit them as soon as possible. Submit them, you have to submit it by or before Election Day, and Election Day is November 3rd. And what I really, really want to encourage people is to take it very seriously when you fill out your ballot, and really make sure you've read all of the directions. We have up on our video, on our website, and there's a link to it here. A student of ours created a video on how to correctly fill out your vote by mail ballot. It's very, very important that you fill it out correctly, because if it is filled out incorrectly, that heightens the chances that it's going to be discarded and not counted. So it's very, very important that you take your time, really read your directions, and really fill it out correctly. And then finally, you can verify that your ballot was received and counted. So the earlier you submit it, you can be checking to check on its status and make sure it was received and make sure it was counted. And if it wasn't, if something went wrong, then you still have time to address the situation. So really, really important. I think the thing that we want to emphasize is, please don't assume that practices are going to be what we thought they were going to be this fall, and to really do your research now and think ahead about what you need to do and need to do really now. Again, just a strong reminder that if you want to register to vote or update your voter registration, you really need to do it by October 13th. Again, I've given you some resources on where you do that. The other item I really want to highlight for everyone, as I mentioned, we here on this Rutgers campus have honed our Are You Voting Rutgers model over the years. But given the challenges facing not just Rutgers students, but college students nationwide, we've built upon our experience with Are You Voting Rutgers and have been able, through a generous gift, to be able to actually create a new resource called Are You Voting National, which is a microsite, and you can access it at areyouvoting.rutgers.edu. that really allows you to do what you would do on the Rutgers, Are You Voting Rutgers site, but really it's meant to be a one-stop shop for college students around the country. So you see there's an interactive map, you can find your state, we'll take you directly to your state, give you all the nuts and bolts of what you need to know about registering and voting in your state. We also have a page with frequently asked questions that are applicable nationwide. Some resources for students who, for example, might be looking for reliable news sources or reliable public opinion polls, information about voting rights or resources when it comes to voting rights. We also have a chat button. We have a live chat feature that we have a schedule that we have put up on the website of hours when we will have students actually out on that live chat feature answering questions immediately. Or if we're not there, we have an email where you can email those questions to us. So we've just launched this in the last few weeks. We encourage you to check it out and to share it with, colleagues, friends around the country, but in New Jersey also, but really meant to meet the needs of college students, not just here in New Jersey, but students voting nationwide. So as I said at the outset, and I conclude with, if ever there was a moment for colleges and universities to step up and really support their students and encourage voting, registration and voting, now is the year to do it. And I really want to emphasize that this doesn't have to be, shouldn't be partisan, but it should be pro-democratic, lowercase d democratic, that really is an extension of the mission of higher education, is to prepare our students. If we're going to have a successful system of self-government, it requires that students are prepared, motivated, have the skill set to participate in elections. So what I would encourage everyone on this call to do is to contact your friends and family and make sure they have a plan to vote, and walk them through the plan that we've laid out. Certainly encourage students to visit Are You Voting National for voting information nationwide, or Are You Voting Rutgers if all you want is Rutgers specific, New Jersey specific information. I do want to highly recommend the New Jersey Division of Elections has a great portal, New Jersey Voter Information Portal. I'm looking at it now. It has a lot of information that's very easy to understand, accessible, and should answer all of your questions. If there are any faculty on this call, or if you know any faculty that would be amenable, I'm encouraging faculty to take this PowerPoint and post it on their learning management system, whether if they have a Sakai site, a Canvas site, and have these resources available to students. On our Center for Youth Political Participation website, we have more resources for faculty. As I said, I think this is a year in particular where in many instances for students, faculty is their closest link this year to their students, as opposed to certainly student groups like RUSA and all sorts of student groups. But faculty are so connected with students this year in ways that maybe they haven't been in the past. So posting these slides on their Sakai site or their Canvas site is another really important way that faculty can be supporting students. And then finally, we have a number of social media platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're also on YouTube. We have a TikTok account as of the fall, as of 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I encourage you to follow us, and we have updates up there all the time. And of course, more often than not, these messages are for students, but by students. Whenever possible, we want as much peer-to-peer contact as we can. If we were on campus, that would be Rutgers students out there doing voter registration drives with our fellow students. But we also have them heavily involved in reaching out to students via Are You Voting Rutgers and Are You Voting National? And I know NJPIRG is going to be following me, and certainly they are in the same situation where they really have students on the front lines, really trying to help students as best as they can to get registered and get to the polls. But I think I would just kind of close by saying what I tell my students all the time is that, politics matters to you and you matter to politics, to not lose your opportunity this year in a year where young adults are poised to make a significant difference in this election and in future elections. But it takes a plan. There are resources available to you on this campus and nationwide, and I really hope you take advantage of them. So thank you, Nick, for allowing me to come, and please feel free to share this PowerPoint slide with whoever you want to share it with.
Dr. Matta, thank you so much. We'll put the
My
video
pleasure.
actually on Facebook and YouTube, so you can watch it if you want to play it back for your colleagues and anything like that. It'll be public.
Awesome.
So
thank you.
wonderful to have you. And then, we'll have some questions. I don't want to keep you too late because it's
Sure. No, that's okay. I'm okay.
But, okay, thank you. But
I'll stop. You want me to stop sharing?
Yeah, I have Kavya on panels
Okay.
as well. So Kavya, if you want to introduce yourself and make you a presenter, let me know if Kate or some other folks from PIRG want to be put onto the panel, and I can bump them up real quick. But just if you allow me a moment. Presenter. And then Kavya,
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, first of all, Dr. Matto, for sharing those amazing resources and highlighting the importance of the student vote, which is something I'm going to talk a little bit more about. My name is Kavya Srivatsa. I am the chapter chair of NJPIRG students, as well as the statewide board chair. And as Dr. Matto mentioned, we do a lot of work with Eagleton and the Division of Student Affairs through the Are You Voting Coalition. We've got really big plans to make sure that we double voter turnout at Rutgers this November compared to the 2016 election, and also see some incremental growth from the 2018 election as well. And we really want to win the ballot bowl this year. If you guys, just a reminder, the ballot bowl is an initiative from the Secretary of State's office that tries to get as many college campuses involved in voter registration to see who can get the most. Just some healthy competition to get everybody civically engaged on campuses across the state. And this upcoming week is Voter Education Week. And during this week, we will be making our final voter registration push. We call it the VR Blitz before the deadline in New Jersey, which is October 13th. And after learning what tactics do and don't work for voter registration, after we had events for National Voter Registration Day, we kind of figured out the best way to maximize our efforts and ensure that we reach the entire campus population and hit our goals, which is to maximize the student vote turnout this election season. Our top tactics that we find useful, just to share with you guys, is we find that class announcements and listservs have helped us. A majority of our complete voter registrations are actually coming through in this way. And so we want to also do as much faculty outreach as possible. Just like Dr. Matto mentioned, they're such an amazing resource, really, to get this information out to students who might not otherwise be getting this information. Another way we want to maximize a student vote is by partnering with other student organizations, whether it's competitions between organizations to see who can get the most registered, or even other events in collaboration with Greek Life, student government, campus relations partners, and of course our coalition partners. And finally, we want to try to get publicity through different media platforms. I think it's really important to meet students where they are, and that also happens to be social media hits, making sure that whatever media sources they're reading are covering the importance of getting their registration up to date and just making sure they have all the resources they need to have a vote plan for November 3rd. And also through relational organizing. And so these are the ways we're going to be spreading the word to try and get the message out there to as many people as we can before October 13th. Because as somebody who's personally done a lot of voter registration work over the last few years, there is nothing more disheartening than coming across somebody who really wants to vote and is simply unable to do so because they weren't able to register before the deadline and they didn't know when the deadline was. So I just want to end by saying that millennials and Gen Z, as Dr. Matto also pointed out, make up the largest and most diverse group of eligible voters alive right now. And we have our own range of values, ideas, and issues that are unique to us. And this means that we can make a big impacts, but that's only if we vote. We can choose to let other people make decisions that impact our future, or we can vote and get a future that works for us. And that really starts by simply making sure your voter registration is up to date. So I would like to stress once again and encourage everybody to check out the RU voting website and share the resource with your networks, particularly if you're a student, so that we can maximize the student vote turnout this year.
Kavya, thank you so much for giving that presentation. Oh, there's some feedback.
Thank you for having me.
Happy to have you. So if we want to have any questions for Dr. Matto or for Kavya, you know, PERG, RU Voting Coalition, what they're doing, ways that you can get involved, feel free to raise your hand and I can call upon you guys. You can put them in the chat and then we'll go from there. So I see Max has a question, so I'll unmute Max.
Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Fabulous. A question to Senator Matto. Hi, Senator Matto.
Hi, Max.
Do you also have any campaign in terms of Senate races, not just presidential?
I'm sorry, say again.
Do you also have any
information about it?
No, initiative to encourage student vote in the Senate races?
U.S. Senate, yes. I mean,
Yes.
absolutely. So yes, I would really emphasize, and I think I speak for PERG too, but I'll let NJ PERG speak for themselves. But definitely, I think. Obviously, we're speaking tonight about the presidential campaign. Are you voting, NJ PERG? We want voting. We believe in voter participation for all elections, local elections, state elections, national elections. In fact, I would argue, it's where probably the local elections are the most important elections. It's the decisions made by mayors, by city councils, by boards of education that affect our lives most directly. And those are the elections that people pay the least amount of attention to, and voter turnout rates are the lowest. I also would put a plug in for, I want young adults to not only be voting, I want them to be running for office. And I think those are also nice routes if you're interested in running for office, volunteering on boards and commissions. So I would say voter participation in all elections is important and matters. I don't
Thank
know.
you very
Yeah,
much.
my pleasure. You agree, Kavya?
Oh, 100%.
Okay, I thought so.
The numbers were far more dismal for the state legislative elections. So I just want to put that out there. All elections are important.
Absolutely.
And New Jersey has one every year. So
Absolutely. Right.
All right. Thank you both, Kavya and Dr. Mata, for those answers to that great question. Let me check if there's any more questions. I see Andrew. Andrew's a question, so I'll mute Andrew. You can ask your question.
Is my hand like virtually raised or something? Because I feel like this is the second time that this has happened.
You have a question mark next to your name, assuming that there's a question. But I tend to.
That's bizarre. I don't know why that's happening. In this case, I do not have a question.
Okay, well, thank you, Andrew, for being here. Question or no question, we appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
All right, thank you. I know that it was a very comprehensive presentation, so might have answered most of our concerns that we had, but
Great.
We're definitely going to work with you a lot the next 2 weeks to get the vote out.
Great.
I told Kavya and some other folks from PERG how we've been working with NJ with the vote by mail.io team has their own platform to get that across other states as well. So we're working hard with you. We appreciate all the work you're doing. So if there's no further questions, we can adjourn the meeting. So Dr. Maddow, Kavya, thank you again for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for
Really
having
appreciate
us.
Yeah.
Get out the
thank
vote.
you so much.
Thank you.
Get out the vote, exactly. Have a good night, guys. Thank you.
You too.
So.
Take care.
Good night, everyone.
And then RUSA members, there's no formal agenda for tonight's meeting with legislation. There was a motion to amend for a voting phone bank, but I'd encourage us to go. I can drop a Zoom link and we can just go to that call. So does anyone have any questions about anything RUSA related, anything that way? If you're coming here for a certain attendance objective, we put the attendance link in the chat, and I'll add it one more time just so folks have it. So we'll add that in the chat if you'll give me a moment. Okay, so if you came for attendance, the attendance is linked in the chat as well. Otherwise, I'm gonna add a Zoom link, and if folks want to come, please come, and we'll get out the vote at Rutgers, which is just as important on divestment and tuition and other vital issues. So if you'll allow me a moment. Does anyone want to speak before I motion to adjourn the meeting? Is there anything folks want to bring up? Max, it's an exclamation point, so Max, I'll mute you. Yeah.
Yes, please. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Just to encourage everyone, I'm in the Senate, Gavin's in the Senate, talk to Maria in the Senate, Jay's in the Senate. If you have anything that you would like to wish to change in terms of the new policy regarding whether it's the Code of Student Conduct or the new Title IX, please let us know. And because we'll be the people who are actually deciding whether to make any changes to those recommended changes. So please talk to us, and especially in the next few days. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Max. And so, following the voting period, I told Gavin and Jay as well, I'll be staying up, early hours if we need to be to write an official recommendation for the Senate, and Max, helping out as well. But, folks in the Slack or email us, we're happy to hear from all students. So without further ado, if you'll allow me to get my personal room, because I gotta do that. One moment, please. Okay, I'll put it in the Slack. I'll put the Zoom link in the Slack if folks want to come. But thank you guys again. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion.
Motion by Andrew. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. All right. Any opposition? Seeing none, the meeting is adjourned. Click Slack. Let's get out to vote. Thank you guys. Have a great night.